G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. And if you're new, welcome. Today, we're going to be speaking to buyer's agent in Sydney, Ramon Cura from Cura Property Buyers. How you doing, mate?
I'm really well, thanks, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
Not at all, mate. I'm excited. I think we've been speaking about this for a little while.
It has been quite a while.
Like all good things, they take time.
Yes,
and
they do.
Here we are in the studio, and we're going to talk all things buying property in the Sydney market as well. Before we do kick off, I just want to reiterate that this chat is general in nature and not intended to give advice. Ramon, our paths crossed, I'm going to say like 10 years ago.
Over 10 years ago, that's right.
When I started, I first had a mortgage choice business. So if you're listening, I left Commonwealth Bank on a whim. I'm like, I'm going to become a mortgage broker. I bought a mortgage choice franchise, or took over one based in Alexandria, and I got an office, and I shared that with Daniel Eisenhood, who's a mad risk insurer, and he's like, you've got to meet this guy Ramon. You've got to get and Amanda was like, you got to meet Ramon. And I'm like, who is this Ramon, Blake? And then you showed up with this energy, and I was like, this is Ramon. But I think the connection was really strong because you understood where I was going on my journey. You've been a broker, like you experienced it firsthand. So I think that kind of gave us a good connection. All around, just top bloke as well. I think I've got a lot of respect for you, and then the ability for us to then work together in a professional sense has meant that, our friendship has gone to a professional relationship.
Yes.
And seeing that, what we've worked on together and where those clients have ended up and where our own lives have ended up. Mate, 10 years ago, I didn't have kids.
I had two young children.
Right.
And I guess what really drew me to you was we had a coffee in the grounds of Alexandria.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talked about when you left CommBank and became your own mortgage broker was really being very educational and looking after the interests of your clients. In other words, being very much values-based when you approach your business. Yeah. And I left mortgage broking to become a buyer's agent for exactly the same reason.
Yeah.
So that, for me, was the real clincher. And it went from there. I knew there was someone who I could work within the mortgage industry that shared my values.
Nice.
And it's hard. I think it's hard to sometimes stick to those when there's money on the table, or when there's a client who is asking you to do something that you may not feel it's right, but it might get a win for you. And I think that separates people in our industry, in our businesses, from those who may want to, I guess, take the business approach or take the commercial or the dollar approach. So it's what really, I guess, got me when we spoke.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the sentiment. And like I always say, the respect is mutual, and seeing, I guess, your personal journey, seeing your professional journey, I think we both get a kick out of that. And that's I think we want to see that for both our industries, is people that are going to do some great things. It's not necessarily always the size of how big you grow a team or a business. That's not necessarily the vanity metric. I think it's the personal growth, the personal journey that comes along that, which is how have you grown, evolved, developed as a person, and then the lives that we've impacted along 100%. The way. I just look at I call it the ripple effect with our team. Like, you've helped one person, but then you've inadvertently helped their family. Then you've helped their kids have, security by having their own home. For example, you've helped them buy in a great location. That means those kids are going to go to a great school, for example, and have great friends. And then, that's going to lead them down a certain path as well. And so sometimes we don't get to see what goes on behind the scenes once we've, completed a loan or, got the property purchased, for example. But just that ripple effect can have massive implications, and that's something that I feel like we can overlook sometimes when we're doing the deals.
Absolutely, and in real estate, again, we can fall into the trap of becoming transactional. So because we deal and transact properties for our clients on a regular basis, it can easily become just a number to us. And so it's important for me that I constantly remind myself, what am I doing this for, and why is my client, the buyer, what is it that they're going through? What am I doing to relieve them of whatever stress or whatever concern that is going on for them? Because they're buying a property, but they've got to live their daily lives as well, which today we all know is a lot.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of stresses. There are a lot of things pulling buyers or our clients in all different places. And if there's one thing that I can do to help them with the biggest investment or financial investment in their lives, then that is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, spot on. Perfect. Before we kick off, in the true tradition, I also asked about the 3 Ps. A little about yourself personally, professionally, and your property journey, whatever you want to share.
Great. So in short, personally, I am a child of immigrants. So my parents migrated here with my brothers and I in 1974. I was 2 years old.
Yeah.
I actually didn't speak English when we moved to Australia. And so when I first went to school, I went to what's called an English as a second language class.
Oh, right, yes.
And my journey of being Australian started there.
Yeah.
I've had a fairly varied career right through from being in the army at the end of high school. I got my degree there. Then when I finished my career, I actually started in banking. So I was actually a branch manager in those days when branch managers actually had authority to delegate lending. So I was mentored by a wonderful branch manager, actually in Northbridge branch, not too far from the city.
Yeah.
And then went into corporate head office. My degree allowed me, or was in human resources. So I spent some time working in HR, but the sales bug bit me again. And I went back into mortgages, but as a mortgage broker.
Nice.
So I did that for about 10 years. And then I had clients, during that time, I would have clients asking for my advice about buying property, about going to auction, about investment property. And so I got my real estate license and then realised I actually enjoyed working with my clients as a buyer advocate or a buyer's agent than I did as a mortgage broker. So I made the switch. So for the last 14 years, I've been a buyer's agent. I started advising only on investment property, but the business has evolved. And now I provide a full service, whether it be apartments, houses, or investment properties for buyers, predominantly in Sydney.
Yeah, nice. I love the fact that you then specialised, right? So we've got buyer's agents who can do all sorts of stuff. I had plenty of buyer's agents on previous episodes, and what we love is when a buyer's agent kind of niches down or knows their market very, very well, intricacies of that market, for example, and livability. So boots on the ground is something that we speak about a lot. I think one thing you mentioned here is the Sydney market, and it's probably one thing that I feel like a lot of our listeners are Sydney-based, for example, and there's 4 words that I use to describe it, not only the Sydney market, but the broader Australian market at the moment. So is it unaffordable? Is it unattainable? Is it unachievable? Or is it underquoted? And I did a bit of a video on this just before Christmas. I put up on our Facebook, I think, just talking about these 4 uns. And it feels like the great Australian dream is slipping out of reach. There's so much research, so much data comes out going, people are more despondent than ever. Home ownership levels have dropped to the lowest levels in 3 decades, for example. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read the quarterly essay by Alan Kohler.
No, I haven't yet.
I'll send you a link. I even might put up the podcast episode that he spoke about it. But I read this over Christmas and, mate, just talking about the last 20, 30 years of Australian property building goes all the way back into, how Australian property market was kind of built from the Menzies era all the way through to now. And I guess all these little decisions that have made the market what it is today.
Yes.
And so that really got me thinking, like, is it unaffordable? I mean, it is, because it's like the second most expensive real estate market in the world, Sydney. Is it unattainable or unachievable? Now, they're 2 very distinct, different things. Unattainable means that it's out of reach. Unachievable means that I think it's a mindset thing personally. Or is it underquoted? Give us your opinion.
That's a really good set of questions. And Aaron, if we read or listen or watch what is out there, it can be easy to think that is the case. Any one of those or all of those together is the case. What I can say as a buyer's agent is I've actually seen the amazing resilience that Australians have, that when, in particular, in this case, when it comes to property, just what Australians can do to actually achieve that. That, I guess, fundamental desire to find a home or buy a home, because it's there and it's so strong in Australians, they find a way. And what I can say, and I'm sure as a mortgage broker you'll agree, the options for being able to find or finance and buy a property, whether it be Sydney or anywhere else in Australia, I think there are so many more options today than there were when I started, over 25, almost 30 years ago in banking. So without going into too many, there's the ability to leverage on your parents or family equity or a savings, whatever savings assistance that governments will give you, or any kind of exemptions around stamp duty. It's there. And I think the most important thing in the answer to that question is, don't try and do it yourself. And I always say to my clients when they come across my desk, my first question is, have you met with your mortgage broker? Have you run scenarios? Have they told you what your budget is? And at the same time, your dream might be to own a house, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't buy something that's on the way to that. Yeah. And for a lot of people, especially in Sydney, it will be an apartment. There's no shame in buying an apartment. At the same time, there's no rush in buying the 3 or 4 bedroom house that seems to be unattainable, because the reality is, in my experience, having been both in mortgages and as a buyer's agent, is people will trade up and people will grow into the property that is important to them, or once it's important to them, as long as they have help. And that to me is the key.
When you say help, are you talking like the team around them, or are you talking financial help, or what's the...
All of it. So when I meet with clients, they will vary in the type of help that they get. So I'll have, interestingly, I would say about 40% of my clients at the moment, that's about 8 of them, are under the age of 35. And how they've got to the point where they can borrow has happened in varying ways. So one of them is getting assistance from their parents in the form of a gift. Others have worked and sacrificed and decided, well, if I can't afford in Sydney, where can I buy in Australia? So I'll start with an investment property and build from there. And interestingly, I've had clients who have had that mindset of, well, I don't think I'm going to be able to afford a home in Sydney, so I'll start small and I'll just leave it at an investment property. And lo and behold, years later, once they've built that equity, they've progressed in life, both in terms of their career and their income. It kind of shocks them, or they shock themselves when they realise, well, that property that I bought 5, 6, 7 years ago has allowed me to build enough equity and a deposit to upgrade. And so it's about getting help, yes, from those around you. It could be family, but definitely professional help. Absolutely. And I'm going to give you mortgage brokers a plug here. One of the things about mortgage brokers is it's your job for life. So when I say to my client, choose your mortgage broker carefully, because if you get the right one, they will grow with you. And that's the model that I've put in place with my business, that I want to grow with my clients. I want them coming back to me as they progress in life, as they sell their property and upgrade.
I think it's spot on there, and this is not a plug for myself or any brokers necessarily, but I think the team that you surround yourself will project a lot. So the ones that can project confidence, going, hey mate, you can do that. Yes, I find ways to get that done. Don't come to me with excuses. Like, there's a mindset to go, hey mate, if you want to get in the market, now's the time to buy. We know that in 6, 12 months, like we look at the year ahead, and we're going to talk about the city market in a second. Stage 3 tax cuts come through. How much extra borrowing capacity it's going to put in, back into Australians' borrowing capacities. Then we talk about, I'm not advocating this at all as like gospel, but there's talks of rate cuts late 2024. Yep. Whether that happens or not, yet to be seen. But that will then drive the market. For example, we know that immigration's strong and building supplies are low. So these are all the markers going, it's primed for a fairly strong year in 2024. It just depends on which side you want to be on. Are you action-taking, decision-making, or what's the cost of indecision and inaction? It's
a great point. And I've seen you talk about that quite a bit.
It's become my go-to mantra, because I feel like people can connect with the message, because I've tried, I've tried different angles and I've tried different messages, but the property market rewards action takers, decision makers.
It does. And one of my mantras that I feel goes along really well with that, I'm often asked, when is now a good time to buy? Yep. When is the best time to buy? And my answer to that has always been, the best time to buy is when you're ready. Yeah. And the way to get ready is to run your numbers, and the way you run your numbers is you get help. You talk to your mortgage broker. You do your research by searching for properties online. You can see what's available, what they're selling for, and maybe even talk to a buyer's agent or talk to a selling agent. But getting that advice, taking the action, and not accepting what you're hearing in general. In other words, not necessarily listening to the hyperbole of, well, it's expensive, it's unattainable, it's unaffordable, and actually taking that action. You might surprise yourself, and people often do, when they realise what they can actually buy when they get the right advice.
Yeah, and I'm sure so there's some clients when you're having a buyer's brief, they're going, here's everything we want. And that's cool. And you're going, well, what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? And what are the ones that we can strike out? So that you kind of, I guess you're working that coaching role going, what are the ones that we absolutely cannot negotiate on, i.e. we don't want to be on a busy street, we don't want to be on a sloping block, for example, maybe we want a north-facing property. These are the non-negotiables, but everything else then at some point then has to come with a bit of a question mark going, they're nice-to-haves. How do you have those conversations?
Well, there'll be times when I sit with buyers or a buyer, and I would say 95% of the time, the criteria that they come to me with is not the same as the criteria they end up buying.
Give us an example if you can, because I'll give you my own personal example afterwards.
Okay, so interestingly, I had one of my most interesting examples was a woman. She was single, and she wanted to buy a 2-bedroom apartment in Bellevue Hill. That was the brief. So we actually started the brief in October, and we didn't find anything for a couple of months, and we came into the Christmas break and decided, and she was going overseas for a holiday, so we paused. But when she came back from the holiday, she had gone on holidays with a bunch of friends, and she said, Ramon, I actually have stayed at a few of my friends' places, and they live in the inner west. I'm just wondering, do you think I should be buying in the inner west? And what we did was we ran some numbers, we looked at some properties, and it turned out that she could actually afford what she could afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Bellevue Hill, but she ended up buying a 2-bedroom terrace in Balmain.
Awesome.
And the most important lesson from that period of time, from that time, or for that particular client, is she would not have known that had she not started the process. You have to go through the process, and the process involves getting your finance. So going through the process of getting your approval, or at least advice from your mortgage broker about what you can do, because that will give buyers confidence about what they can and can't buy. Then the next part of the process is to do the search. Now, everyone has to go through a process. It just depends on whether that process is going to be full of, I guess, an up and down, potentially stressful, painful process, which a lot of buyers in Sydney go through, or part of, I guess, the value add I like to talk to my clients about is we'll put you through the process, but in the most efficient, least stressful way, so that you can make the decision you need to make for yourself. Yeah. If you're yourself, when you're making decisions, you'll make good decisions. But if you're under stress and extreme stress, and you're in a situation where you've had enough, your chances of making a good decision are nowhere near the same.
Which is where you get like buyer fatigue starting to kick in, right?
Absolutely.
Like your second pre-approval, and you've looked at probably on average maybe 30, 40 properties, you keep getting priced out, you keep missing out. In the end, you just kind of see those price points. You're like, that's an anomaly sometimes on these purchase prices. You're like, I think they've just paid like over and above to make the pain go away, because they're at their wit's end. And it's like the only way I'm going to win is if I just go well and truly over, blitz everyone, and make this little nightmare kind of come to an end. And
that's right. So it's not necessarily the case that every buyer needs a buyer's agent, but what I can say is if every buyer worked with a good buyer's agent, what they will walk away with is the knowledge that whatever they paid for that property, they've gone through the right processes, and it should be the right property at the right price.
Yeah, I agree. And mate, to echo your example there, Bernie and I had the suburb in mind. Like this, I think this is what happens. I think you get fixated on the suburb.
Yes.
We see that. I think Sydney's well and truly that suburb entrenched in that sense. We want to be in this particular area, and then you compromise on the type of home because you want to be in that particular area. And it's like, well, hang on, how do we live? What do we enjoy? Like, what are our lifestyle factors that we want? What do we truly want out of a dwelling in our house? And that ultimately led us 2 suburbs down to where we ultimately have bought. But yeah, I completely understand when people start and they've zoomed in and zeroed in on an area that's non-negotiable. Mate, be a little bit more open-minded. Whether you're an investor, whether you're owner-occupied, that sense of this is non-negotiable. Be willing to compromise on everything because you can't just lock yourself down like that.
That's right.
Anyway, the Sydney market, you probably would have had buyers last year that are like, Ramon, I'll just kind of sit this out. This fixed rate cliff, listings will come up where distressed sellers have to sell because they can't handle it. Rates are going up. And all that really happened was Sydney prices increased, people's borrowing capacities decreased.
Yes.
We didn't have the fixed rate cliff that everyone kind of banged on about. So from your perspective, did you see buyers last year that missed out and they've missed the boat, for example? Or have you seen them kind of just go, look, I'm coming back in 2024. I'm like, this is my year. What's been your read?
It's a combination of a number of things. Definitely there are people that see what's happening and and decide that they're going to sit out. Usually when a buyer ends up in front of me in a meeting, they've usually started the process and they're in a state where they've looked at the market and they essentially, with what happened last year, with interest rates going up, in other words, property becoming more expensive to buy and property prices going up because of the low numbers of property listings that were happening, you had this really weird anomaly where, well, what do I do? Because if I sit out, my interest rates are going to go up. If I wait till they eventually go down, I might even be priced out of the market by then. So when they land in front of me, it's really, my role really isn't to talk about the market in that sense. It's really to boil it down to, okay, why are you here? Why are you sitting in front of me? And what is it that you're wanting to achieve? And that's a very loose statement, but what really comes out in that conversation typically is what is the criteria that they're wanting. And what I've noticed, especially in the last 10 years as a buyer's agent, is people are very straightforward. They're not going to fall for the salesy kind of conversation. Yeah. So buyers and clients respond to me if I'm being straightforward, if I'm being honest. And sometimes I'll be telling them what they might not want to hear, and that may well be what you're wanting to buy is not, your budget is not going to meet that. So
which is where we have to have this, yeah,
absolutely.
Which is where probably we I guess show our professionalism, going, we can be attached to the numbers, but guys, the numbers will dictate the strategy.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right. And so, but what I find is when you're honest with them and straightforward, they will make choices. They will, if they've got the right broker, if they have the right family members around them,
yeah.
But they're also true to each other and themselves. The decision shouldn't and won't be really that hard, because when you have the truth in front of you, you can't really run away from it.
Yeah.
And the truth may well be, okay, well, we have to sit it out and save more money. Or it may well be, well, we might have to adjust our expectations and what we do. So instead of finding a home to live in, we might have to settle for an investment property, which is not necessarily, which in and of itself has pros.
Yeah.
And then but if we get into the market, we're in the market. And that is a big incentive, either whether it's for a home or an investment property.
Yeah. And do you find and I say this is the clincher, the mood shifts, because all the time they're waiting for the market to slow down when they're trying to buy. And as soon as we're bought, now they want the market to increase. And
Absolutely. It's the one thing about Australia. Property is almost like a second job for people. It's almost like a qualification that you need to go through to become an Australian. You need to be able to talk about property at the dinner table, and everyone's an expert at the dinner table, and everyone will have differing views. So parents will have different views, friends will have different views, because Australia is, one of the advantages of living in Australia is because it's such a nice place to live, because it's so politically stable in comparison to most places around the world. We have that luxury of being able to have these conversations and make these choices. And I think it's easy to get lost in how expensive everything is. But I also think what we should do is be, in a sense, grateful that we are living in a country where we can have so many more choices than most people have. What's the price of that? You know, what is the price for having those choices as opposed to, okay, well, let's leave the country and go to a place where the property prices are cheaper, but what's the lifestyle like?
Spot on.
Yeah?
Spot on.
So, and if I can give a quick example, you know, we all talk about Bondi Beach and Sydney being super, super expensive, but at the same time, being from Sydney, we like that, I guess the reputation of being a global city, of being up there and being, you know, smart and savvy and intelligent and having all the really cool places. Well, that comes with a price.
Spot on. Sort of. I feel like we say the exact same things because that's the premise of my book that's coming out, right? Which is there is a price tag that comes with living in one of the best countries in the world. Political stability, medical support that we get.
Yes.
It's safe generally from a livability and crime perspective. Our weather, like our winters, we can walk around in like shorts and a shirt in winter at some point.
Yep.
And people come to this country for our summer and our beaches, and the produce is world class.
Yep.
You know, we take care of our elderly. We have, you know, fair enough, it's expensive from a daycare, childcare perspective, but we've got the support as well. So you overlay all those livability metrics and you go, yeah, no wonder we sit, you know, within the top 20 in the world. We've got, I think, 5 cities across the top 20 or top 30. Yeah, there is a price tag that comes with attached to that. And here's the thing, like the government is giving people opportunities to buy a part of the country. I'm like, there's not very many countries, and for all the research I've done for the book, there are not very many countries that the government's given people a leg up. I mean, we've got people that can get into the property market with a 5% deposit, pay no mortgage insurance because they're first home buyers. Yes, it's expensive, but there are mechanisms that are in place. And I'm like, right, the mechanisms are in place. I think what we need to work on is your mindset.
Yep.
To
Absolutely,
get into the
Aaron.
market.
Can I just add as well, we don't have to buy our first home in our 20s and 30s.
The average first home buyer age is 36, going on 37. So, I mean, that's skewed because you've got some younger buyers, but that also says there's a lot of buyers above that as well.
And well, it's easy to think that first home buyers are younger.
Yeah.
And their budgets are really low. I can, off the top of my head, give an example where last year in April, really close friends of mine bought their first home for the bargain basement price of $4.5 million. And I think the message in that is, you know, live your life. I think the priority of buying a home will come naturally as you progress through life. So as we live in our 20s, our 30s, and I say this to my young son, is enjoy yourself. And as you progress, if you live truly, you'll get to that point where you may or may not meet a partner, but you may get to that, you will likely get to that point where it does become a priority for you. And because our max or our ability to earn income maximizes around that sort of 40s, 50s plus,
correct,
there's plenty of time to save, to buy property. And usually by the time you get to that age, people should be relatively successful.
Yeah.
Now, when I say relatively successful, I'm not necessarily saying millionaires. I'm saying in a situation where they're earning enough to make good choices. And one of those choices would be to buy a property. So don't be in a rush.
I love the philosophy. And that's the 20s. Your 20s are there to enjoy. And there's some people that have done some exceptional laying some foundations. I think we've had Ravi Sharma on Young Guy on from YouTube. Make some awesome property decisions. And they're the beneficiaries of that in their 30s, but not everyone has that same opportunity. Not everyone has that same maturity
or desire.
Man, I was so immature in my 20s. I was buying cars with sound systems in them, not properties. Whereas I think I was a little bit late to the party. I think I was like 26 or 27 when I bought my first property. Whereas I see younger people like, you don't realize how good you've got it with like your head on your shoulders. When you get into the market in your early 20s, you will thank yourself later for it. But they've had to make some sacrifices,
of course,
in that sense as well.
When it becomes a priority, and at the right time, people make those sacrifices because it is a fundamental need. From it's quite a primal need, isn't it?
Correct.
Then when it comes time to do so, people generally utilize or prioritize resources to make that happen. In other words, save the money or find the money.
That's it. Going back to the Sydney market, and you mentioned about apartments, that quite often buying the house isn't one, financially an option, or two, it's too far from work or family. So a unit or an apartment becomes a very good viable option to buy into the Sydney market. A lot of buyers agents will go, no, we don't ever buy apartments, but you've bought apartments for our clients in the past, and there've been some really good performing properties, in and around Surrey Hills, the inner west, eastern suburbs. So take us through the philosophy around buying apartments, why people should consider it, for example, and it's nothing to be looked down upon.
I think what we should start with is a really important but fundamental myth that is bandied around a lot. And I've come across a lot of buyers who have been told or educated to think that buying a house is better than buying an apartment because land appreciates in value and buildings depreciate in value. Not realising that statement applies more to tax saving, because when you have an investment property and you need to claim tax, well, the land will appreciate, but you depreciate a building to save tax. It can get really complicated talking about that, but what I will say is this. With an apartment, it's not so much the land that increases in value, it is supply and demand. So typically, if we talk about a suburb like Surrey Hills, it's the desirability of that suburb that will drive prices higher. So because land is limited in a suburb like Surrey Hills, houses are naturally more expensive. Yeah. So that lends itself to apartments. The beauty of apartments is because you can go vertical, in other words, build high-rise towers or build a lot of apartments on fewer or smaller land space, that makes it infinitely or relatively a lot less expensive than a house. So here's the conversation around where we talk about stepping into a house. Apartment living is the way of the future. So if you look at what the state government is doing around building the new metro stations, they're building apartments above those metro stations. Now, when I was growing up and going to school 30, 40 years ago, living near a train station you were like the pauper.
Yeah, I mean, literally it's the wrong side of the tracks.
It was exactly the wrong side of the tracks. Today is completely different. Yeah. So what I would say to anyone considering or looking at apartments and thinking, well, it's kind of not what I really want to do. Well, let's take a very balanced view. What can I afford? Why would anyone want to live in an apartment? And let's face it, a lot of people like to live in apartments. And
culturally, I mean, I'll just stop you in your tracks a little bit. I think Anglo culture is very different to, say, Asian culture, a Middle Eastern culture, South American, African. Where you look in those countries, they don't have many options. Like apartment living is just standard. They don't have like the sparse land for houses. It's not the done thing. And quite often you have multi-generations living in an apartment, which will blow people's minds. But I mean, go back to Sri Lanka, or you go through Singapore or Malaysia, for example,
Hong Kong,
Thailand. Like apartment living is all the rage.
Yep.
What I feel the difference though is there's 3 and 4 bedroom apartments in those countries, and we lack, apart from maybe the penthouse or the top tier properties, we lack more of those 3 and 4 bedders. And I'm like, when you're talking about the metro lines, and I'm talking about this with our team as well, is like, if they just put more 3 bedders that are more affordable in those areas. And I went through, what's that one down near the Shire, that new brick city they call it?
South Village. South Village.
Yep. And I was like, this is awesome. You've got the shopping centre there, you've got Coles, Woolies, whatever, you've got all the shops that you need, gym, everything on site. I'm like, it's effectively a village that you don't need to leave on a weekend. Play park for the kids. Now, someone that doesn't want the maintenance of a big home, but maybe wants a 3-bedroom unit, train line to the city, mate, we're talking. Like that's a very, very good option, right? Yep. If they put more 3 and 4 bedders, that could take away people with this need to buy the big home is kind of the point I'm trying to make.
A really interesting phenomenon, Aaron, is a lot of people, there are people who, as their needs for space grows, they will make a decision. And just to add to that, with the mobility that we have as a workforce, the assistance technology gives us to be able to work from essentially anywhere in many jobs, what is happening now is people who like to live close to the city will make the sacrifice, because there aren't that many 3-bedroom houses or apartments closer to the city. They'll make a short to medium term decision to move out into the suburbs. And then what's happened is I've worked with clients, particularly Gen Xers, who have made that decision, bought in the burbs, whether it be a 3-bedroom townhouse or apartment or a house. Their children have grown up, and they're now in a position where they've paid down the equity to a point where they can afford an investment property. They're also wanting to buy somewhere closer to the city because their desire at some stage will be to move closer to the city again as they downsize.
Yeah.
So another thing not to be afraid of is don't be afraid to go further out to get the kind of place that you want. Interestingly, there are the satellite suburbs, the burbs as we know it, are becoming much more, I guess, there are much more entertainment options, much more food and drink options, particularly as Sydney grows into multiple cities. So right through from Parramatta to Hurstville to Wollongong.
Central Coast, great.
Don't be afraid to consider the suburbs and think, oh, if I move out to the suburbs, I'm banished there and I'll be there forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something about the dignity that comes with apartment living. Like I think we've kind of seen it as like transient rent, and then you outgrow that to a house. But it's like there's a certain amount of dignity that comes with being able to like lock your door, walk out, and not have the maintenance of a big
Absolutely.
yard. Trust me, we've got a big yard, and it takes maintenance, right? Having a house takes a fair amount of work.
And being able to walk 3, 4, 5 minutes to the train station or to get your coffee.
Great. One thing that we spoke about in the past is smart and strategic purchases. So when you're going through, you're doing your due diligence. How are you then, say, we take those apartments in the Inner West or Balmain that you just bought in recently? How are you then going about striking out shortlisting, for example, and then we'll talk about auctions in a second.
So it's hard to get away. First and foremost, you cannot avoid the process of looking. When it comes to apartments, it's actually, because there are so many of them out there, you can afford to be a bit more ruthless with your choice, because the trap is you can go and see an infinite number of apartments because there's so many of them. The smart side of buying an apartment is to initially just test out as many as you can. So apartments come in many different styles, right through from very modern apartments through to character style apartments like Art Deco or converted warehouses. As a buyer, get out there and initially and have a look as many as you can, and you'll work out the style of apartment that you like. So I just, for example, had some buyers who literally just before Christmas ended up buying. They were looking initially at a relatively modern style of apartment with lots of light, ended up buying a converted warehouse. The smart approach was to look at as many as possible, but also to get to the suburbs and actually go and have breakfast in the local area. Live or try and, I guess, sample living in those suburbs, because if you can eliminate suburbs, then you eliminate having to look for properties or apartments in those suburbs. So once you find a suburb that is within your budget and it's a suburb you can happily or potentially live in, zero in on that and don't spread yourself too thin. That's what I would say, particularly when it comes to inner city apartments, because there are so many of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I love it. And then your last point and question for you is auctions. And I know you attend a lot of auctions for clients, for example. What's your auction strategy like?
My auction strategy, it's really simple. So first and foremost, as a buyer, if you can get to an auction before you even start buying, the more auctions you get to, the better. Now, doesn't
that blow your mind when you speak to people like, this is our first auction that we're attending for the home that we really want to buy? I was like, this is wild.
It does. At the same time, I understand because there's an inherent fear of turning up and going to an auction.
Yeah.
There's almost like an avoidance of going because it's not something they want to deal with immediately. But when you go to an auction and you have a look, what I would recommend is if you can go to 2 or 3 and just look for the patterns. So every auction will essentially follow a very similar path or a similar flow. So typically when the auction starts, bidding is often slow. So, people are hesitant to make the first bid unless it's a buyer's agent involved. It will usually be about a minute, maybe even 2 minutes before the first bid is out there. But once the first bid is there, the auction will speed up. And initially, auctioneers will want large bids. As the auctions slow down, so in other words, the time between the bids increases, then the size of the bids should drop. And now this is my core strategy. I like to wait until other buyers have knocked themselves out. I think we're down to the last 2, maybe 3 buyers. And that's the case when the auctioneer says first call, second call, and they're about to drop the hammer, I throw my first bid in then.
Wow.
Why compete with everybody else at the start when you can sit back, watch people knock each other out, and then if you're still in it, if it's still in your budget, make your bid at the time. And when you come in and make your bid, it's like this new person has jumped in, and you'll see the reaction not just from the other buyers or the bidders, you'll see the reaction from the crowd, and they'll say, oh, someone's just come in. And it gives you that initiative. So if you can, wait as long as possible before you make your first bid. Now, there's a risk that that bidding may well go above your budget. You're never going to get that property anyway.
Yep, spot on.
Right?
Yep.
And after you've been to a couple of auctions and you've seen enough properties, hopefully you should be able to get to the point where you know that your budget is going to be more than competitive.
Love it.
Yep.
It's a good, it's sage advice. I think auctions are one of those minefields that people almost want to avoid, like you're saying, whereas I think, the confident, prepared buyer will prevail at an auction because you're effectively confident in your own skin and
stick to your plan.
Yeah.
And also one other thing is accept if you're at an auction, you feel like you're out of your depth, having a plan will help, but also accept that you're not a professional. So if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. And I also feel, just to round out this point, a lot of people are anti-auction because they're like, it's hustled, it's high pace. But I'm like, it's also, if you flip it on its head, it's very transparent. Because when you're trying to make a call to an agent going, this is the offer, and no one ever really believes, we've got an offer here, and like, is the agent making this up? Whereas you can see your competition, you can see what someone else is willing to pay. Yeah. It's the most transparent way. Yes, high pressure, you've got to make decisions in a split second. But it also, if you kind of look at it through a different lens, it also is quite a transparent.
I've got a recent example. In December last year, I had some clients who really wanted to go for this house near on the eastern beaches. And pre-auction, the agent said they were very open to selling before auction, and it was a knockdown rebuild. So the agent said, "Look, we'll accept it, an offer. Anything that's $4.5 million and above, we'll accept."
Yeah.
When I did the research on that property, I could not find comparable sales that were anywhere close to what the owners or the agent was talking about.
Too high or too low?
Too high.
Okay.
So they were pitching way too high.
Yeah.
But also, because I couldn't find accurate comparables, I actually posed the question, maybe it's worth going to auction. Now, when I realised there was only 2 other interested buyers, after speaking with the agent and gathering the intelligence, I actually said to my clients, look, you can pay $4.5 million now. I recommend you go to auction, because if you pay for that money, at least you'll know it's only going to be $1,000 more or $500 more than the person you're bidding against. They decided to go to auction, and we bought it for 4.3.
Wow.
$200,000 saving.
Yeah, nice. It's a refreshing view on actually going to auction sometimes, isn't it?
And I think it's, if there is that concern about going to auction, and I think this is a really important point to me as a buyer's agent, that if you are hesitant or concerned about going to an auction, find a buyer's agent and speak to them.
Yeah.
My approach and my philosophy as a buyer's agent is to always be accessible to a buyer at auction, no matter what their price or their budget is, because I know I can make that difference. Yeah. And I'll adjust my fees accordingly to make sure that it's affordable for that buyer. And I think that's another, I guess if I can talk about other secrets that I use as a buyer's agent is, not everyone is going to get charged the same fee, because everyone is different.
Yeah.
Because there'll be mortgage brokers who tell me, look, this is what they can afford. I know it's not what you would normally pay a buyer's agent, but are you okay to help them? Absolutely. One of the reasons why I became a buyer's agent was so that my buyers didn't make the same mistakes that I did. And I've made them. So if I can make sure that one person has got to auction and whether they buy it or not, gone through the right process, then I would rather do that than send them away simply because they don't have the money to pay a buyer's agent fee. I think that's really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Ramon. You've been super generous with your time and your knowledge, man. That's why I love getting you on here. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I've really enjoyed my time. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. If you want to get in touch with Ramon at Cura Property Buyers, we'll include the details to Ramon's socials and the business page as well, and a way to reach out. But mate, I loved your outlook. I love your perspective on life, mate. Onwards and upwards for 2024.
You too, Aaron, and I look forward to working with you as usual.
Appreciate it, mate. If you've loved that episode, please feel free to give us a review, like, subscribe, and share with a friend if you know someone that's trying to buy in the Sydney market. We'd love to help. Until next time, that's a wrap. Take care.